Well, welcome. Tonight, one of my favorite parts of the year, the symphony is about to open. And we start with the conductor, the maestro of the Energizer Orchestra, the orchestra that just keeps on playing.
Yeah. How are you doing, Al? Nice
Well-
to see you again. What have you been doing with yourself besides becoming a grandfather? Congratulations.
That's the most fun part of it
That's the
all.
most important part. Huh?
But why don't we start with an introduction in case somebody doesn't know the orchestra?
You're Al Correa.
And you're Paul Serpine.
I'm Paul Serpine, founder, executive, and artistic director of the Claflin Hill Symphony Orchestra.
And congratulations, year 16.
Year 16, Sweet 16. I think we're going to have a debutante ball or something this year, probably.
Well, I'd say there's probably many companies, be it acting, orchestra, any type of companies related to the arts, that envy you celebrating Sweet 16.
Well, I mean, maybe. There's also companies like the Boston Symphony Orchestra, I think, is nearing in on, 135 or something like that. But 16 is good. At least I'm still here in year 16 and hope to be here for year 30 or something like that. But, I mean, it's funny, when we started, I never thought about any of that. It was just like, give a concert or make a plan to give a concert, try and find some support money from local businesses and corporations to support it, hire some musicians, sell some tickets, bring an audience in, play the concert, go home, celebrate, the next day, get up, do it again, give another concert. It was kind of actually like after the first concert that we ever gave on May 7th, 2000, when we opened with Carmina Burana. And at the end of the night, it was kind of like, well, now what do we do? Well, I guess next year we have to do a whole season of these concerts. So we have to start planning to do at least 4 of them. And it just went on from that.
But there's been so many wonderful memories. I mean, the Carmina Burana, I love the planets.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I could watch you perform Holst over and over and over and never get tired of it.
Well, it's kind of funny because this summer we moved into a new office suite,
Moving up to the...
Well, so many different things have happened since the final note sounded back in April of the Crystal Anniversary season. We redesigned and launched our new website at the end of the summer. We moved into a new office suite. Our landlord, Ronnie Pagnini of Downtown Realty, and formerly owners, his family
Music
owned
Nook.
the Music Nook. Ronnie has been very kind to us for years and had given us office space years ago just to get us moved out of the little spare bedroom office in our house on Claflin Hill that it started in, So that meant I actually had to get dressed up to go to the office now. And then we moved to a 2-room office space in the same building a couple years later. And then this spring, a couple things happened where it all kind of came together. Number one, our new board president, Tom Wesley, who works for Waters, got Waters to donate all sorts of new office furniture, nice office furniture, because the stuff that was in our offices were a lot of hand-me-downs, things that came out of my
When Paul
house.
Revere moved it in, it was
Yeah,
just...
right. It was fine, but one night at a board meeting, he's looking around at all the ragtag collection of things and said, how would you like to re-outfit the whole office with nice furniture, And it's like, all right. So I went to talk to Ronnie Pagnini, our landlord, because that was going to entail moving stuff out of the office, getting rid of it, and also having a moving truck out front on a certain day that was going to take up parking spaces for hours. And so when I went to talk to Ronnie, he said, by the way, I was actually thinking about, how would you like to move upstairs? There's a 2nd floor in the Grant building, and it was unoccupied. And he took me up there, and it was like a whole suite with, fronting on Main Street with windows, a huge boardroom conference room. I mean, it was really nice. And I was like, holy cow. And he's like, for the same very discounted
I was going to say,
monthly
you're
rental.
thinking, this would be a wonderful place that I can't afford to pay for.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, but in a way, the office space we were is easier for him to rent.
Sure.
Because it's on the
Right
first floor.
downstairs in the middle of...
And you know, at any rate, it was really kind of nice. So, you know, now we were going to have to move everything. I ended up calling Scott Claflin over at Benjamin Moore. I mean, they're a Claflin Hill supporter. Got him to donate all the paint we were going to need to repaint the whole office space. So Benjamin Moore gave us paint. My neighbor, Ron Harris, who's got a business as sort of a handyman, he came in and he actually did all the painting and various other things that we needed to do to, you know, spruce up the space. Tony Gallo, at Gallo Moving and Storage, fellow Rotarian. Again, Gallo is also a Claflin Hill supporter. He sent over some guys to help move the big stuff. I mean, I spent all of July, you know, every day I would allocate an hour and a half to carrying armloads of music up a flight of stairs. You know, I mean, it was a good workout.
And Miss Susan kept
for the
saying,
summer.
it's your workout.
Yeah,
This is how you're going to keep in shape.
It was good, you know. I mean, and I sometimes would run with them, you know, and I do like 6 trips, and that was enough for the day. And so we moved in, and now we got this really gorgeous office space that impresses people when they come. We've had meetings with potential corporate sponsors and charitable foundations. They come in. We have a nice overhead projector that's displaying a Milford TV production of one of our concerts that, you know, I mean, there was these people from Foundation for Metro West a couple weeks sitting with us, and they're just fixated on the video footage up there, and, you know, I mean, it was all very nice. So that, the new website, you know, lots of new activity on the board. And in the midst of all that, to get back to what we were originally talking about, thinking about all the things, I mean, as we were going through stuff, moving it, packing it, kind of come across all these, you know, old programs, recordings from concerts 15 years ago, 12 years ago. Now we have all sorts of, the hall is lined with beautiful posters of previous concerts. And you kind of think, holy cow, I forgot all about all that stuff. I mean, there has been an awful lot of amazing evenings. Someday when I have a lot of time, I'm going to just sit down and watch all the videos one after another, you know, kind of binge watch Claflin Hill concert productions. So, but here we are, 16.
But even in the middle of it, Claflin Hill still finds time to do the pops so that we get to bring our kids down. You know, I'm looking forward to dressing up my grandson someday.
Oh, I
bring him
know.
down.
Imagine that. Yeah, that's something to look forward to. I mean, actually, when one of our grandchildren came, who was 3 at the time, to his first one, that was a pretty memorable thing. So you have that to look forward to. And when Santa Claus comes in, you know.
I still remember the day Ray Guerrera from the BP came down. He sat next to us, and he brought his son and his oldest son and oldest daughter, and they were young. The look on her face when she looked over the rail and saw Santa come out.
Mm-hmm.
I grabbed a picture of it, and it's just, to this day, to me, that symbolized everything that was right about being there.
Mm-hmm.
Claflin Hill, beautiful music, fun, and a child in amazement.
Yeah.
In the Milford Town Hall. You know, it just seemed like all the prerequisites were right, all the elements were right, everything was just perfect with that little smile when she's pointing, saying, Daddy, look, Santa's here.
I know, he's the big hit of the evening. No, I mean, that is really one of the more special moments every year in our concert series, that whole night. I mean, there's just something about the night. Just as you're in the hall before the concert, greeting people as they're coming in, Everybody's kind of dressed in holiday kind of attire, red bow ties or sweaters, or, the place is packed. People are seeing their neighbors, their friends, they're bringing their grandchildren. It's
it's
pretty-
funny, over the years, I look down and there's Francis in Virginia in their spots. There's the Seavers you can look at all these families that it seems funny. You're always looking down and there they are, and there's and if it's not them, you get worried. Is something wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually do that a lot too. When I'm turned around to talk to the audience, I'm actually scanning the audience as I'm talking about this piece we're about to play. So my eyes are kind of going do, and I'm thinking, where's so-and-so tonight?
Right. They're always right there.
Or who's that sitting over in their chairs? Who are they? And I'm kind of like,
You don't want to be mean, but why are you in Francis's seat? Why are you in Joseph?
but
So now, people always wonder, there's a fixed holiday pops. Bang. How do you plan the season? You got 4 other concerts.
yeah, and even holiday pops though, you got to do some. There are standard things we do every year, and as part of the holiday pops. But number one, as you're looking at the entire season and holiday pops, you've got to think about reinventing yourself every year. You don't want to be perceived as just kind of doing the same formula.
Why? We kind of like you the way you are.
Well, I know, but
You're going to
everybody,
have
you were
a
just
very long-haired presentation to begin with.
Yeah.
And at the very end, you're going to have some popsy stuff.
And
Okay,
this
so the
year we're
question
doing
is-
a mix more of.
Yeah, I
mixing
was
it all
wondering how
in.
Billy the Kid got into the first concert.
Well, Billy the Kid is actually not a pops piece in the first place, but I'll get into
We'll
that.
get
in
into
a
that,
sec.
but you and I, we're never going to agree, because Billy the Kid to me was Billy Joel on
but
Long
this
Island.
is actually not Billy Joel. This is Copeland. But no, for instance, talking about Judge Larkin, comes up to me after almost every single concert and tells me that he didn't, he came in tonight not wondering how we, the orchestra, could outdo the previous concert.
one.
But yet tonight he's leaving thinking this one was indeed the best one ever. And you really need to be doing that for every person in the audience, that no matter what night of the season it is, every time they leave, they walk out thinking that really topped all other Claflin Hill Orchestra concerts tonight. It may or it may not have, but something about it has to exhilarate them more than the memory of the last thing that they enjoyed.
You've got to hit a balance, because you can't do all, if I call it bubble gum, I know it's insulting, but you can't do all show tunes.
No, you can't do all show tunes.
But if
and
you did
can't
all
do
the big B's,
all the the big classical numbers. No, there's got to be I used to call it fusion cuisine for music. Mixing. That was what Claflin Hill kind of started out with. And how we started to build the audience in the first place. You wanted to do Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade. Well, it's an amazing piece of music, but if I put out a sign in front of Town Hall saying, we're doing Scheherazade this week, nobody would have bought a ticket. But we were doing some songs from Phantom of the Opera, which kind of fit in the whole theme. Scheherazade is an orchestral tone poem about, drawn on the Princess Scheherazade in the Tales of 1001 Arabian Nights. So there's that sort of night music concept theme.
Pillars, the fifths.
Well, that was just straight out, full-blown, muscular classical, that one.
But if you would put out, come see Shostakovich's Fifth.
Right. There again.
Paul,
right. We did Beethoven's Fifth, and then the Shostakovich.
the Beethoven's Fifth, at least I kind of know a little bit about the name.
Yeah, you've heard of Beethoven. Everybody knows bum, 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 bum.
Right.
So
But
they're already,
Shostakovich?
Yeah.
But somehow the pillar, it got my interest.
Right. And then you found out,
Actually,
Shostakovich
I
is
enjoy
pretty
his
hard,
movies.
and
his
it
music.
was pretty cool piece of music. I mean, the same thing. You know, the night that we did Scheherazade, everybody came because I brought my brother Matthew, the opera singer, up from New York to sing some Phantom of the Opera tunes. Everybody loved that, but at the end of the night, they went out of the hall screaming about Scheherazade.
Scheherazade.
You know, they just were blown away by that. And, you know, that's what we've done. You know, so when we're looking at a program, usually, you know, it's funny because people will ask me, including musicians, starting, say, in January, what are we going to do next year? And it's like, I have no idea. I mean, nothing has come to me yet. It's like, you know, I could make lists of things and keep them on my desk somewhere, and then I'd lose the list anyways. But, you know, it's usually I wait for something to just suddenly click in my head like, wow, we have to do that piece. But that may be one piece, and where is it going to fit?
Now, how do I do a wrap
What else are
around
we
it?
going to wrap around it? And what would the theme be around, you know? So, and I was just telling a group of people that got together a few nights ago for a preview of the symphony season. They said it's kind of like planning all of your menus for the next year, but you're doing it 6 months before. And I don't know about you, but I never know what I want to eat when I go to the restaurant, even, you know, at the moment the waitress
which
comes
type
up to
of
me.
restaurant you wanna
or
go.
which restaurant, you know. And I mean, if somebody says to you, so what are you going to want to eat on April 30th in 2016? It's like, forget about it, you know. I mean, so as things, you know, over the spring, I start to sort of have some ideas of pieces of music that maybe we haven't done yet, or a composer we haven't explored enough recently. And so maybe I'm thinking of this and that.
Then even you'll change your mind.
I do, because I had a totally different idea for this coming season than what is now about to be played, including the first concert. I originally was thinking of kind of doing a return to big symphonies by, you know, mainstay classical warhorse composers, you know, like a Brahms symphony and maybe a Sibelius symphony. We may do that program someday yet, I don't know.
But that would normally fit into the Paul Serpine
Well, that would fit into
first
that
concert
opening
of the
November.
season.
And I was kind of going with that idea. And then everything changed. Number one, all right, so here we get to how the menu came to be planned. November 14th was going to be our first concert of the season. It happens to be Aaron Copland's birthday. So, and Aaron Copland is one of America's greatest native son composers, right? We've done some Copland over the years. I like Copland an awful lot. I can't wait to do Appalachian Spring again. We're going to do that probably next season. So, you know, what haven't we done? Well, we actually did Billy the Kid back in 2003, but that was a really long time ago. And I really like Billy the Kid. And it kind of then gave the opening for the rest of the program to develop. So Billy the Kid, as you know, is, you know, that quintessential American outlaw that actually probably lives in each and every one of us. It's what is America, you know, the pioneer spirit, the sort of little bit outside the pale spirit that kept them moving west and didn't want to be told what to do, how to do it.
Especially this year, when you look at who's leading the presidential
Well,
candidates,
yeah,
it's the outsiders.
Yeah, it's always, America has always been outsiders or people looking to make a different way, right? And Billy the Kid is kind of a hero of that mindset in a way, you know? So Billy the Kid is a great piece. It was a ballet that Copland wrote for Martha Graham and her company. And so what, you know, okay, so Billy the Kid, kind of a rascally kind of guy. Now, Richard Strauss, German composer, wrote really massive orchestral tone poems. Romantic, you know, I mean, sort of late 1800s into the 1900s, you know, the really pinnacle
when you
of
think
German
of
romanticism.
stereotypical German big orchestra.
Big sound, right. You know, Wagner, Mahler,
Yeah.
Strauss.
Yeah, the Wagners would fit right in there, and you wonder, can we fit them all in our little
Right,
town
I
hall?
mean, I mean, and even some of the Strauss tone poems, like I'd like to do Zarathustra someday, but the orchestra would probably take up half of the
I was going
room.
to say, can we afford?
And can we afford it? Yeah, I mean, you got almost like 8 of everything, 8 horns, two or three
I mean, I would
tubas.
imagine it'd be a fun piece for the orchestra.
It would. It'd be a very hard piece. And
They'd
of
have
course,
to
for
work
people
hard.
that don't know Zarathustra, it's actually better known as the theme to 2001, right? Though it goes on for about, a good hour and 20 minutes after that opening fanfare. So, but we did Strauss's tone poem Death and Transfiguration maybe 5-6 years ago. It was part of the Heroic Soul Music Concert. The orchestra did an extraordinary performance of that. I was actually just listening to it recently when we were in the process of moving and uncovering all sorts of forgotten archives, and I sat and listened to that whole performance that day, and it was like, holy cow. So I'm going to do Till Eulenspiegel's Merry Pranks.
Right. I was going to say, isn't it amazing that when you think of that piece you just mentioned, 2001, I mean, when it was written, nobody thought of sunlight coming over the planets in a space station, right? Today, can you listen to that music without almost going back
To the movie.
To the movie?
Yeah, though in a sense it was the perfect piece to put in that movie because, Strauss's tone poem is actually about Zarathustra, who was, this sort of Germanic superhero, super god figure that, and he awakens at the
Right.
beginning of the piece on a mountain, and the sun comes up, and he's been.
You picture the Norse gods of Thor just
Right.
getting up and, okay, it's time.
Time to go and start relaying all this stuff I've been thinking about, and that's what the Nietzsche book, Thus Spake Zarathustra, is about, and that's what Strauss was depicting in that. So it kind of made sense to use that part of the piece in the movie that Kubrick made. But
it's just amazing when you look back. So many, I mean, I hate to say this, but you think of the Looney Tunes and how much music was lifted from classical for all the cartoons when we grew up.
I know.
And yet people will say, oh, that's a cartoon theme. No.
It was actually a very good thing, I mean, Bugs Bunny, all those various at the moment I can only think of Bugs Bunny, and they use so much classical music in Bugs Bunny. But even, I don't know if you remember the cartoon Mighty Mouse. Do you remember Mighty Mouse?
Here I come to save the day.
Right,
Yep,
right.
there you
There you
go.
go. And not only that, it wasn't that they used actual real classical music, but it was done operatically.
The theme.
They
the
sang.
Way, yes.
And Mighty Mouse was a tenor. As he was singing and flying through the air saying, here I come to save. He was in full operatic tenor voice.
Yeah.
His girlfriend was always the heroine who was the soprano, and the evil bad mouse was bass baritone voice.
The bass baritone.
And just like any
Opera.
by Verdi or Puccini, right? And kids are watching that. They don't know anything about that.
Imagine ever telling your children that they're learning the basic elements of a Verdi opera?
By watching a cartoon.
They'd have a heart attack. Yeah, I mean, they'd sit there and it's like, tell them you're going to teach them opera. And I could see my children looking at me saying, no. Yet you put them in front of the cartoons.
Yeah.
And
On the other hand, a lot of that, because my teacher actually played cartoon soundtrack recordings, for a living. Back in the day, they used to record all the music in New York City in studios. He did Casper the Ghost and all sorts of other things. It was very hard music. I mean, it was designed to constantly be changing pace with the cartoon, and the cartoon action was designed to keep changing pace,
right.
to keep a child's 3-second attention span interested. But, in a way, it's my belief all the way from the beginning of Claflin Hill that people can learn to have an appreciation for this great music if maybe it was introduced to them almost like it was in the cartoons or something, that because people actually liked that music in the cartoons. They didn't know it was Grieg or Borodin or somebody else, you know, that
The
we've done. And
Valkyries.
we've done all these pieces at symphony concerts and have constantly heard people come up and say, holy cow, I remember that from a cartoon when I was a
When
kid.
you think of Wagner, well, think of Apocalypse Now.
Right.
And what comes to mind?
Yeah, the Ride of the Valkyries.
The Ride of Valkyries. You know, you sit there and say, here, that you're waiting for the helicopters to come over, and yet you sit there and say, no, guys, that really wasn't written for Apocalypse Now.
No.
It was there before helicopters.
But, you know, so in a way, sometimes through pop culture, people get an introduction into so-called serious culture, find out they like it. So, you know, in reverse order, if you can take a symphony orchestra and kind of do that same kind of formula as you're planning concert programming, you know, something that's familiar, they're going to know that somehow from something in pop culture, so they're going to feel comfortable, and then you can introduce something else on the program with them that they wouldn't have heard. You explain it to them, and they go out of the hall that night. They've had something comfortable, something familiar, and they learned something new. They found out it didn't hurt. They actually kind of liked it, and who knows? Maybe next time they see that particular composer's name, Shostakovich or Rimsky-Korsakov, you know, being advertised on a playbill, they might say, you know, I might check that out.
But, you know, even today with streaming music, you know, I find on the computer when I'm in the office, if I'm going to be alone, I'm just thinking, if I go on and say all Wagner all the time,
Right.
or us, you know, Wagner or us, whatever the station is, I don't even know what they are. They just come up.
No, I know. It's
And
like
then you
Pandora
find,
or something,
yeah,
too. You
but
know.
an hour, 2 hours later, you just realized, wow, I've been listening to that type music that I never would. But it started because I heard something somewhere, either at Claflin Hill
Right.
or something else.
Yeah.
And it became interesting just to hear, let me hear more of this.
You know, I mean, sometimes I'm starting to feel like an old technology curmudgeon or Luddite or something, you know, like it's just, you know, I know how to work at my computer and I don't want to learn new things, but, you know, a lot of the new, so-called new technology, I mean, it's been around now for a generation, right, has really done some great things, you know, in terms of providing, you know, an opportunity for people to learn about all sorts of things or explore new things. You know, I mean, one of my sons, I mean, come to find out in his little, whatever he had there, his iPad or what was the listening thing?
The iPod?
The iPod thing, right, you know. I mean, he had like 1,400 different things in there loaded that he had downloaded off the internet. That everything from like Herbie Hancock to Gustav Mahler to, you know, Vivaldi and Bach.
In the Serpine House, you may have the Mahlers, you know, the big classic. I got to admit, I don't think I would be buying many albums if we were still back in the vinyl days when we grew up, and you had to buy the albums to listen. Mm-hmm. Don't think Shostakovich would have rated up there.
Wasn't on your shopping
But on the other
list.
hand, or Wagner, you know, I'm sorry, I don't think I'd buy a lot of his albums. Just on the other hand, when I can just say, stream it for me. Let me just listen, and it makes it, you know, typical American. I want instant gratification,
Right.
and I want it painlessly. And all of a sudden, I get this whole series, and all of a sudden, that's the planets. I did buy the disc of the
After you
planets.
heard the, yeah.
After I went, I said, I've got to do this because I enjoyed it. You only gave me 2 planets, which I wanted to hear all the rest.
What do you mean?
The first time I listened on the DVD from Claflin Hill,
Yeah.
I got the one, but I must have gotten the economy version.
Really?
But then,
We did record that entire thing.
I must have only gotten a
But,
piece.
you know, it was a long, long time ago, and our recordings back then were not quite at the same level that they are now. And in fact, you know, we're definitely going to do the planets again in another season or two, just because the orchestra has grown so much that I think we could do a really extraordinary performance of it in
But
some
to
soon
do them
future
all,
date.
I mean, I'm always amazed that Claflin Hill seems to be known for giving a full concert before the intermission and then somehow sliding in a full concert after the intermission.
Well, you know, it's funny because one of our musicians, it's part of a kind of get to know the orchestra project that my wife Susan is kind of spearheading along with everybody here at Milford TV. They're going to start doing little interviews with various members of the orchestra. So, you know, Susan sent out a sort of request for interest from musicians who, and so one of the guys was here today actually recording an interview. And I just had a chance to preview, you know, it's not quite finished yet, and it's going to be a great piece. Tim Cowett did it. And it was funny because actually Brent said, you know, that's one of the things that makes Claflin Hill Symphony such a, you know, a great orchestra to be a musician as part of, and why so many musicians want to be a part of this orchestra, because the programming that we do is very energetic and demanding, and everybody has to work very hard at it. It really stretches them. And yeah, sometimes it's like almost like the equivalent of 2 whole concerts crammed into one. I mean, you know, not too many orchestras would attempt to do 2 major works. You know, you'd have one great big piece, and then some nice, you know, a curtain raiser.
I hate to call it
overture,
filler music.
filler, you know, some pleasant, easy. You know,
Yeah.
we only have to run through that once, and then we
One
spend the rest
rehearsal,
of-
we know that.
Yeah, we're all set with that. And we spend the rest of the week on this big thing. Well, you know, and I was actually talking to Brent after. We were talking about, you know, how we go about putting these together. And it was kind of like, you got to really walk in with a plan. I mean, I have legal pads full of my rehearsal schedule for each night. You know, which parts are we really going to hit on? What do we have? What's really going to require a lot of attention to get us in the comfort zone with that, you know? Brush up on that thing, move on to this
Well,
thing.
you mentioned a couple of the pieces. There's a 3-minute, really difficult piece that if you don't hit, it throws the orchestra just mentally off.
Right, you know, and I mean, yeah, because you can clam one thing and all of a sudden that's going to cause, you can feel it, like everybody gets a little nervous now, you know. As a matter of fact, I mean, talking about that Planets, that actually happened to us in the Planets, because, I mean, it was a great performance, but it was
Only you
over
know.
10 years, and only I know maybe, but, you know, through the week it was going along pretty good, you know, in the rehearsals, and it was an exciting piece, and everybody's into it, and there's things in the Planets that you could hear, like was the future of the inspiration for John Williams. You know, there was the John Williams moment, you know, the Star Wars moment, this, you know, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and so on. And I don't know what happened. Something happened in the performance in a movement where it just didn't quite jive the way it had been jiving. And for the rest of the evening in that piece, it was like, kind of like,
You guys
a
were
struggle to
walking.
stay on
You were
balance.
walking on a hot tin roof. The rest of us are sitting there saying, "Holst would be proud."
yeah, maybe.
You know, to us,
I mean, my principal trombone, Jamie Clark, walked up to me after and said, "What was that?" I said, "You tell me. I don't know." You know, I mean, it's just, you know.
So if we look at the 16 season, or the 15, 16
16, yeah.
season, Concert 1, we're going to talk about right now, but now Concert 2,
Holiday Pops.
Holiday Pops. But then Concert 3, what do you have envisioned coming up?
Well, all right, so one thing that we did this year was to try and, I mean, it's typically always been about the last weekend in January. Over the last couple of years, it's been kind of one of the lower attendance concerts. Don't know if it was the program on it or not, or that, you know, we also had like
The 2 feet of snow the day
2 feet of
before
snow,
didn't
right.
help.
I mean, that was last year, and it was 9 degrees at concert time. I mean, there was an idea we could move it into February, so it's the first week of February. Now, of course, we can have the same weather in February. I don't know if it's going to do anything for us. Another thing is, you know, well, it's one more week further away from the end of the holidays, so people...
The fatigue may wear
The
off by
fatigue
then.
is even further gone. Plus, It's also 1 week closer to Valentine's Day, so we're doing a romance concert on February 6th. And again, it was like, wow, now that's a whole great idea. So, by moving it into February, now we can kind of attract people. It's like an early Valentine's Day
So you
gift.
start with the romance idea.
Well, first thing that comes to mind, of course, is Romeo and Juliet, Tchaikovsky. Well, that's great. Everybody knows that. And, it's been used in movies every time, as I heard Brent say in his interview, every time two people are running toward each other with the sun overhead and they're about to
And here comes Tchaikovsky in the background.
Tchaikovsky, right? Well, Serge Prokofiev, the Russian composer, who wrote, ballet music and symphonies, he wrote a Romeo and Juliet ballet, which is a really great set of movements, out of the ballet. So we're going to do some movements from the Prokofiev Romeo and Juliet, so it's like his version of Romeo and Juliet, Tchaikovsky's version. There's a Howard Hanson. Howard Hanson was an American composer, same time as Copeland, taught up at University of Rochester, Eastman School of Music, great composer of the 1900s, 20th century. He wrote this lush, exciting, gorgeous symphony called the Romantic Symphony. So we're doing that too. Also, we're going to feature our harpist, Mason Morton, and bring him out. The harp is a very romantic instrument. And people have really taken note of Mason when he joined the orchestra. He's a great guy, great player. He's very handsome. It's a great
And the
thing.
harp is very obvious.
And the harp is obvious. By the way, Mason also is part of a sort of pop group that he and some friends from BU had started a couple of years ago called the Sons of Serendip. And they were finalists in America's Got Talent last season.
Oh, wow.
They went pretty high up, and I don't watch the show, but it turns out Mason was on TV with that. And then Sons of Serendip were also featured guest artists with the Boston Pops on their 4th of July show.
So talk to me about the first concert. Point me to that windmill.
All right, so Strauss, Till Eulenspiegel. Okay, so we talked about Billy the Kid, which was the sort of starting point to how to build the program. Copeland's birthday, Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid's a rascal. Well, let's come up with a theme around that. Strauss, as I said, we had done his tone poem a couple of years ago, Death and Transfiguration. One that we have not done is Till Eulenspiegel. Now, the full name of the piece is Till Eulenspiegel's Merry Pranks.
Nobody ever hears merry pranks.
Yeah, well...
But you can hear it in the music, in the middle of the music.
Well, yeah, and there's a great story behind that. So Till Eulenspiegel was this sort of mythological folklore figure from German mythology or something. That, he was kind of like the village prankster.
Right.
Was always up to hijinks, going around, upsetting people's laundry,
Turning
on their
over the
lines,
apple cart,
turning
just
over
doing
the apple carts and so on.
Stuff to cause
Right.
confusion.
Now, Till, the figure of Till, is depicted by this little musical motif that is first introduced by the E-flat clarinet. Now, the E-flat clarinet's the short piccolo version in the clarinet family. And it has this
If you say so.
So every time you hear that, there's Till, he's running around.
That's what I said. You're listening to this, and you're just feeling this little rascal kind of.
There he goes.
There he goes.
Where'd he go? He's jumping around. He's running
like
over the fence. People are chasing him. He's getting away again.
He's doing something.
He's like the gingerbread man or something.
something,
laughing at him over his shoulder. And when I was a college student, actually, E-flat clarinet in the clarinet family is a kind of high octane instrument. It's, I used to describe it as what clarinet players did instead of riding a Harley. It's a very loud, high-pitched instrument and requires like special kind of attention practicing it. I mean, if you're going to play E-flat, you've got to devote time to it because it's even harder than regular clarinet. And I kind of became like you know, a kind of pretty good E-flat clarinet
Rascal
player.
that you were.
Yeah. I used to be able to clear a whole floor at the Hart School of Music at night. When I'd go up to practice the E-flat clarinet, you know, every room would have people practicing. The thing is so obnoxious and loud, and I'd be playing my Till Eulenspiegel parts and all sorts of other orchestral excerpts, and when I'd come out for a break, there was nobody on the floor. Everybody had left, you know. And so, you know, at any rate, so there's a certain affinity for Till Eulenspiegel that I have personally. Our principal clarinet, Terry Harrell, who studied with me for 8 years, will actually get to play the E-flat Till Eulenspiegel part in this concert. And so when I told her about it, like in July, she was like, oh boy.
It's got to be like,
I better get going.
you know, you think of a sports analogy, bottom of the ninth, bases loaded, 2 outs, you're there, everybody is going to be watching your performance.
That's right. And at the end of the piece, see, finally the villagers have kind of had enough of Till, and they get together in the story and decide they're going to actually execute him.
He's gone.
Yeah, you know, that's it for Till. We've had enough. So finally at the end, you know, it comes to this big moment, it's building, and then a big drum roll and the brass come in with this bum, 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 like somber, like, all right.
Yeah, instead of the little bit, you know.
And then you hear the E-flat go, dun, no, please, you know,
Yeah,
bum, bum, and then it's shrieking way up high. And then there's this great big, the theme sound, and one more time, and it goes way up high, and then kind of floats down. It's like, yeah.
Okay, they got him.
Till has been hung, he's swinging.
Yep, they got him.
And then it's very sad. Everybody's kind of sad now. Well, you know, he wasn't such a bad guy after all. I mean, poor Till. I mean, really, we were a little rough on him, don't you think? And all of a sudden the orchestra breaks in at the end to the big theme again. And so you're kind of, wait a minute, maybe he is still alive. So that's a great piece. We're going to open with Mozart's Don Giovanni, the overture from the opera Don Giovanni. You know, which really requires no explanation. Don Juan, you know,
I say, point me to that windmill.
Just the name Don Juan. It's, you know, it's not Don Quixote. Yeah. There's no windmill.
But I mean,
the Don
but
Juan
it's the same.
It's like the womanizer, the guy who thought he was God.
You sit there and say Don Juan. It's when we look at Don Quixote, we know what it means. You say Don Juan, everybody knows what it's supposed to be.
You know, you think you're some kind of Don Juan or something.
Right.
God's
I mean, it's
gift
like
to
off
women
we
or
go.
something. Yeah.
Down that merry road that we
Yeah.
all already have images of.
So we're opening with Mozart, Don Giovanni. I actually threw another set of short pieces on the program from the French composer Charles Gounod. He wrote ballet based on Faust, the story of Faust, you know, by Goethe. Now, Faust is also kind of a rascal.
Here you go, more rascals.
You know, hey, you know, who guy actually thought he could make a deal with the devil and come out ahead, right? So, you know, that's a little bit too bad for him. And we're going to feature our principal violist, Dmitri Petkov, in a piece for viola and orchestra. And there's nothing really rascally or rapscallion about that. It's just a chance for Dmitri to come out and do a solo turn. And of course, actually Dmitri is kind of a little bit of a rascal himself. I mean, and we all make fun of violas in the orchestra anyways. It's kind of like viola jokes.
Violas are the brunt of the orchestra jokes?
Yeah, kind of. I mean,
what's
they
wrong with the
take
poor
it good
violas?
naturally. It's like, you know, people will make fun of, you know, well, I don't know.
Well,
what's
everybody-
one go like, what's the makeup of, you know, what's the makeup of a string quartet? You know, which is usually 2 violins, a viola, and a cello. Well, the answer is 1 really great violinist, 1 pretty good violinist, 1 ex-violinist, that's the viola, then 1 person who really hates all violins, that's the cellist. So, I mean, it's kind of, you know, or, you know, violas, you know, they can park in handicap parking by putting the viola on their dashboard. It's kind of in musician jokes, you know. They take it good-naturedly. You know, what's the difference between an onion and a viola? nobody cries when you cut up the viola.
Oh my God.
What's the difference between a viola and a violin? The viola burns longer.
Oh.
You know.
You've just alienated that whole little section of
Oh, they're fun. We all have fun with it, you know, and you know, hell, we even have the same thing in the clarinet family, you know, like if you played alto clarinet, you had the same kind of jokes, you know.
You just made fun of the E-flat guys, and you were one of them.
I was, yeah. So everybody should be able to make fun of themselves. If you know, if you take yourself too seriously, there's something wrong with you.
I just never thought that they are the Belgians of Europe. I mean, I got to Paris, and everybody seemed to have Belgian jokes, and we never knew why.
Right.
So all
Yeah,
of
I
a sudden,
guess, yeah.
I mean, every group seems to have somebody that.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you know, what's that one I used to hear all the time? You know, what's the definition of a gentleman? A man who can play accordion but chooses not to, something like that. I mean, that's something I've been told before. So, you know, we have little musician jokes that probably are only funny to us anyway. So, you know, I could tell you a few of them all night long, and you'd probably go right over your head.
It would go over most of
Like,
our
well,
heads.
you guys have no sense of humor at all. So, at any rate, so that's our opening program. We talked about February.
But explain to me, I mean, when I joke about stereotypes. You know, when I think of Don Juan, I think of Don Quixote, I think of, you know, Apocalypse Now. There are certain things that it's almost association by memory. When you think of Don Juan, tell me about the music. How does the music bring out the spirit of the rascal Don Juan?
Well, you know, I mean, it's just something that Mozart did. And of course, it's a whole different take on that because that was classical. So, you know, it's just the way that he used color in the orchestra, as small as that orchestra was in those days. And of course, you know, Don Giovanni is sung, so it's actually telling the story in words. You know, as music evolved into the Romantic period, it became even easier to make depictions of storylines like that because you had a larger orchestra, a larger, as you would call it, sound palette to work with. Also, compositional rules were kind of relaxed or being broken, you know? I mean, you know, in Mozart's time, there were all sorts of things that you weren't allowed to do in a piece of music. You can't put dissonances, you know, on the main beat of a measure, or, you know, all sorts
Things that
of,
most of us never understood, but
yeah, well,
there was that hierarchy of how you
well,
built.
it was, and a lot of it first came out of the fact that a lot of music was, you know, created for sacred use, you know, commissioned by the church, and so you couldn't have anything that was edgy or dissonant or profane, you know, so a lot of these rules kind of evolved out of that.
I mean, some of the early composers, to just survive, they had to find a rich patron. Somebody that, it wasn't like they went out and cut an album and sold it.
Well, no. I mean, you know, that's another thing, and I think we've talked about that in the past. Like Beethoven was one of the first composers that actually kind of stopped
He
taking commissions
he
from
kind of
people.
snubbed,
He wanted
saying,
to write what he wanted to write.
I want to do my thing, and
even if somebody paid him money,
no.
he was going to, well, sometimes he'd take it, but he'd write what he wanted and he'd give it to them. This is what I wrote for you. And if they didn't like it, it was like, too bad.
Yeah, I want this. Okay, wait a minute. Isn't that what you wanted to write, not what I commissioned you to?
Exactly, you know?
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
I mean, you know, so, I mean, and even in the time of Mozart or Haydn, who had wealthy patrons, you know, I mean, Mozart worked for the Emperor of Austro-Hungary, and Haydn worked for a rich family, you know, lived on their estate and so on. I mean, he was just like the house composer. There were lots of other composers, I'm sure, out there that just didn't have that kind of backing, and they kind of disappear as time went on, and we don't really remember them as much anymore. Rarely find their music being played.
And even in our area, you think of Wagner, and you think of Shostakovich, you think of some of these people that were state-sponsored, essentially. I mean, they were heroes of their little era. Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay, that's a good point. I mean, Wagner, for instance, you know, ended up being, you know, the darling of Mad King Ludwig II of Bavaria, who ended up building him that gigantic opera house in Bayreuth that, you know, still...
But without that patron...
Without that. And actually, before that, I mean, Wagner, you know, Wagner's actually always the big elephant in the room that when you start talking about him, because there's so much other bad baggage that comes with Wagner. I mean, he was a genius. He was a great composer. I mean, those operas are amazing, even though sometimes they're a bit long. I mean, the Valkyries, you know, that Apocalypse Now thing comes out of is actually a 4-hour
Well, when you sit there
opera.
and say, is this ride ever going to be done?
Well, the ride's a tiny little piece of it. You only hear that, you know, in the first act for a minute or two. And, I mean, one night I happened to turn on the TV, and my wife and I were just, you know, kind of surfing through channels, and it was almost bedtime, and I was like, stumbled on PBS, and they were doing the Valkyries, the whole opera.
The whole
at the Met.
Valkyries.
And it looked like, and it was in the final scene, I could tell, because it's this point where the princess of the Valkyries, Brunhilde, who was the daughter of the king god Wotan, who, when she took that ride, actually ended up disobeying her father. So he has to punish her. And he's going to put her on a rock, surrounded by a ring of fire, and put her to sleep until someday a superhero comes to awaken her. But this is her punishment. You know, she's banished. And I said, oh, this is, to my wife, I said, oh, this is the culmination of the opera. This is a great scene, really amazing music. This is Wotan singing farewell to his daughter. Well, she finally went to bed. The thing went on for an hour and a half, and this was the end of that opera. It was the final scene. It took an hour and a half for
to wrap it up.
To say goodbye. It was like, I hung in there and
But
saw
yeah,
the
it's
end.
amazing, because when you think of the Valkyries, you think of 2-3 minutes?
Yeah, but
right?
that opera is 4.5
hours long.
And so, but aside from that, you know, I mean, he was a virulent anti-Semite, wrote some, you know, literature, treatises, you know, that was very anti-Semitic. I mean, became the darling of the Nazis.
I was going to say, he was the poster child of the Third Reich.
Of the Third Reich, right, because of all of the, well, Wagner was very steeped in all that kind of, you know, Germanic folklore and mythology.
But then you've got Shostakovich throwing the wool over Uncle Joe Stalin's
well,
eyes.
Yeah. And
I mean, of all
again,
the
he was kind of like lived in the good graces of the government, you know, being allowed to...
State-sponsored, he's our hero, and at the end...
But on the other hand, if he wrote something that was not approved of, he could end up in a gulag.
He would end up Novosibirsk.
Yeah. And
but
never heard from again. So, I mean, you know, even though as the Romantic period went on and composers kind of started to become independent, a lot of them still had these ties to either government or patrons along the way. You know, even talk about Copland, not that he worked for the government, and Howard Hanson also, and Samuel Barber and other, during World War II, took commissions from the U.S. government to write pieces to uplift the morale
of the people.
I mean, so they were doing their part, you know, as composers, you know, and...
But you didn't have the independent studios, like when you think of John Williams, you think of different composers. They can make a very good living without having to be tied to a very, well, I guess you could say,
tied.
You could
Everybody's
say
tied.
Lucasfilm was a very good patron.
I mean, you know, that's right. You know, I mean,
but
so that was his patron.
I was going to say, now that I'm saying they're not tied to any specific wealthy patron, but
you know,
Lucasfilm was.
In another sense, you know, and this is not unlike things through the 1800s. I mean, composers created partnerships with other creative artists, you know, that, you know, together they work together. I mean, you know, Broadway, I mean, you had the partnerships of Rodgers and Hammerstein. One wrote the words, the other wrote the music. You had, look at West Side Story, which we're going to do in the April concert. We're going to do all the symphonic dance movement
But you know, it's funny because you never think of Rodgers. It almost comes out as Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Rodgers and Hammerstein, even though Rodgers actually did other shows with another composer named Hart. There's Rodgers and Hart, and then there was Rodgers and Hammerstein. So, and actually, I don't think the two guys actually liked each other very much. But you know, West Side Story, you had like the great librettist or songwriter, word writer of the time, Stephen Sondheim. He wrote the libretto to West Side Story. You had Leonard Bernstein wrote all the music, and you had Jerome Robbins, who was the great dance choreographer in that period. You know, so there was like a triumvirate of
Three
three
masters coming
geniuses all
together.
working together. And I mean, with John Williams, I mean, you know, he got hooked in with Steven Spielberg very early on. You know, there was Jaws.
Jaws.
You know, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, George Lucas. I mean,
But again, you think about, of all the music Williams wrote for Jaws, I say Jaws, and immediately, you know, it's like 30 seconds.
yeah, right.
Out of everything he wrote, it came down to that little bit. Like the Ride of the Valkyries came down to 2 minutes out of 4 hours.
Right, and I actually, when we did our movie soundtrack concert last April at the end of our anniversary season, I mean, we opened with Jaws that night. And I almost was going to open with the Dvorak New World Symphony, just the last movement,
Okay.
because the last movement of Dvorak's New World Symphony is the inspiration for the Jaws theme.
Right. It's
It
the
starts
back
on,
end.
it goes,
It's what.
ba-dum, da-dum,
Yeah.
da-dun, 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 dun, 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 dun. That's how
where-
Dvorak's New World Symphony finale begins. And it was almost going to start that and then stop and say, no, it's not Jaws, it's Dvorak. You thought it was Jaws for a second, didn't you? But, you know, I mean, we did the music from Jaws, and yeah, there was that beginning thing, and everybody knows it. And as soon as you hear that, you want to like pull your feet
Up and pull back.
get
Yeah.
out of the water. But, you know, it just became synonymous with terror too, you know?
Well, as I said, 16 years going strong. If you haven't been to a symphony,
Oh, I got one other thing. We're going to have art at the symphony concerts this year. Blackstone Valley Artists Association are going to be mounting displays during the concerts.
wonderful.
Yeah, so we're going to have art for viewing before and after, during intermission, as well as we're installing high top tables for people to stand around while they're having their coffee
and the
desserts.
wonderful desserts that are donated. So
Lots
please,
of improvements.
take advantage of this. It's unbelievable. Whether you love classical music or you're somebody like me who had no idea anything about it, just knew that it was enjoyable and could take my family down to give them an experience that I'd normally have to go into Boston and spend lots of money to do. Come on down to the Claflin Hill. You can look it up, just Google it. For all of $30, you get the best seat in the house. You can't, or 40, whatever it is, you can't go wrong.
I'm going to charge you extra, though.
There you go.
You're
as
going to pay
always-
Boston prices.
There you go.
Because you're used to it.
May God bless. May tomorrow be a better night than tonight, and I hope to see you at the symphony. Good night, all.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just